Hello everyone, welcome to our third session for our Denka 3D printed CAD/CAM webinars. We have been taking a look at some interesting webinars. The first webinar was a little bit about how to manufacture everything. Then we had Ryan Renier explain last week how to take a look at both the clinical and the manufacture aspect of 3D printed dentures. And today we're going to be talking a little bit about the clinical flows. So when we talk about clinical flows, we're going to be covering a few things. We're going to be focusing on mostly on the clinical aspect. As you know, we've already spoken a little bit about how everything works, from impressions all the way to scanning, designing, and then 3D printing either a final or a trying. So what I want to do today is I want to focus a little bit more on the clinical side. So we know that the first step for every 3D printed denture is to take records. Then we will talk a little bit about what happens during the trying stage, and then we're going to be moving from there. Either you can move to a final, or if you need another trying, then you can skip to another trying. So this can be done in as little as 3 appointments, but I really want to focus today on appointment 2 and 3. It might seem like we're moving backwards instead of forwards, and there's a reason for that. I first wanted everybody to understand a little bit about how these are manufactured, so you know the basic things that involve making them. And then I want to talk a little bit about what requirements are, what do you do when you have issues with a trying or a final. And then this is going to help us in the impressions. So we're going to talk about what needs to be fixed when we have issues with trying, and then I'm going to circle it back to what could have gone wrong in the impressions. And then later on the next session, we're going to talk a little bit of how to troubleshoot and how to design. And then the session after that, we're going to be focusing on taking impressions. And the reason we do that is once you understand the software and once you understand the trying, you know what to look for when you're taking those impressions. I've realized that if you just look at impressions and then move forward, it gets a little confusing down the road, because understanding what you need to get right on the impressions becomes difficult later on as you get bombarded with more information. So this way I felt it's a little bit easier. So for record taking, I'm not going to cover a lot right now, since we're going to have an entire session dedicated to getting accurate records and how to ensure these records are correct. But for now, it suffices to know that for these records, there are 3 ways of doing it. The first one is utilizing wax rims, which all of you are familiar with. The second way of doing this is through the analog Denka trays. And then the third way to do it is through the use of a copy denture. So the Denka trays are basically trays that help you take impressions and then also act as your wax rims. So through the trays, you can obtain certain measurements about vertical dimension, centric relation, and then obtain a bite. And then if you decide you want to use the copy denture technique, we're going to go into depth on how to use this technique, which is very helpful if you have an intraoral scanner. It's actually the easiest way to do a 3D printed case with an edentulous patient, assuming you actually have the patient's denture. So it's a pretty straightforward procedure. We're going to be explaining a lot more during our next session. Now, moving forward, once you've taken your impressions, it's very important that you take your shades with a Denka shade guide. The reason being that if you have your PMMA Lucitone chips, and if you have your beta shade guides, there's a slight, very, very small variation between the printed material and the regular PMMA material. So it's recommended that you actually have in your hands one of the Denka 3D printed shade guides instead, so you can ensure that you actually have the shade that you are interested in getting the denture on. And as far as shades for teeth, we have A1, A2, A3, A3.5, V1, V2, and our newest shade, which is a bleach shade, which is similar to BL2. And then we have light pink, reddish pink, original pink, and dark pink. These, as I mentioned before, are semi-translucent and they mesh with the color of the gums to obtain a really nice color. So once you've basically taken all your shades, decided what shape you want, and taking your impressions, many people ask me, okay, so I have everything. How do I go about getting that trine in my hands? And the question I share with everybody is, well, how involved do you want to get in the process? So Denka has several ways of doing this process. If you want to be fully involved, you can design yourself. And then if you have one of the approved printers, you can print the cases yourself as well. You would need, of course, the Denka materials, the approved printers, the approved curing unit, and you can use Denka Design, which is our web-based platform that we'll talk about on our next session. And that particular program is very useful for designing dentures. If you want to design but don't want to manufacture, then you can design with Denka Design and use a third-party software. At this moment, Denka does not offer 3D printing services, but you can still design with our software. Or if you don't want to design, but you want to print, you can request Denka to design for you. We will take your scan files, we'll design everything, we will send you the files that you request, whether the trines or finals, and then you can print them with your printer and the Denka materials and your curing unit. If you don't want to have any involvement whatsoever, then we have a service for that as well. Denka can design for you, Denka can manufacture for you. So it's very versatile depending on what you want to do. So now let's move to the second appointment. So on the second appointment, what you're going to get or you're going to have is a 3D printed trine. It's going to be in one shade, and it's usually in a shade similar to A2. Please keep in mind that the trine material does not come in several shades. So it's basically just something for you to work with as far as fit, form, and function. But it's important that you explain to your patient that this is not the final shades that the teeth are going to look like. So once you get the 3D printed denture trine, you're also going to get a paper from Denka, assuming we manufacture for you. If you want copies of these papers, we can provide them for you as well. And what the Denka trine evaluation and adjustment instruction does for you is it kind of takes you step by step on what to do during that trine delivery. And it takes you all the way from seating the denture and telling you what happens if you're having seating or insertion issues. And then it takes you step by step on what you need to be checking in which order. And if you get through any hiccups throughout the process, it'll tell you what you need to do in order to overcome that, as well as giving you some helpful tips and hints about how to better make the best of your trine appointment. Basically, what we're going to be doing is 4 steps. We're going to be checking the bite and the occlusion. Then we're going to be checking retention. We're going to be checking the borders, and we're going to check anything else as far as aesthetics goes. Many people ask me, well, how long should I book the appointment for these patients? And basically, it all depends. So if you did a pretty good job during your impression session, there is no reason why this appointment shouldn't last less than 15 minutes. Basically, you should be able to insert those dentures almost right away without any areas impinging the patient. If you need to make adjustments, they should be very mild. And then you should be able to evaluate everything else and then move on. If you skip a lot of steps or didn't take a correct bite during your initial impression session, then you might be looking probably about a half an hour, 45 minutes. If you are new to the Denka system and you want to be on the safe side, book 1 hour to see these patients. And then as you move forwards, you're going to have enough experience to determine, okay, this is probably going to be a 20-minute appointment, 15-minute appointment, half an hour appointment. And that is going to be based on how difficult the impression session was, because not all patients are equally cooperative. Now, in this paper, you will see examples of, for example, it says initial insertion, did you have any issues or no issues? And then it'll basically say what to do. So did you grind the maxillary intaglio? Did you grind the mandibular intaglio or the borders? And then it'll say, okay, if there are any issues, then proceed to step 11 and do some things, insert the trine in patient mouth. So essentially in green are the steps that you need to do. And in gray, there are certain recommendations. In these sections, you'll also have areas where you'll be able to write down specific things. For example, in the occlusal plane, you want to lower the occlusal plane by 2 millimeters. So there will be a space where you can write that down. I find these papers very helpful because it allows you to write everything down for that patient. And then once you actually go and place that adjustment order online, you already have all the information that you need, or you can give that paper to the assistant and then they can place the order online for you. So it kind of helps you remember what was done and what were the issues with that patient. So many people ask me, well, how do I check them? What's the order? So the order would be first to see the denture. So what we're going to be doing first is we are going to be applying pressure indicating paste, and then we're going to be seating the denture just like any conventional denture. We have now changed, our trines used to be white before, now we changed them to a cream colored, so you can see the difference between the pressure indication paste and the actual trine. And then, as you know, this is pretty standard procedure for dentures. You just seat it, look for any areas where the denture is showing through, and you have to relieve those areas. I would try the trine first in the mouth and see if it fits. If patient is comfortable, you have enough suction, there's no sore spot areas, you don't even need to use the pressure indicating paste. Another really good tip is make sure you seat the denture all the way and apply pressure. For example, if you're doing the upper, apply enough pressure on the palate. And the patient should, if you have any retention issues, the patient should right away tell you where he feels pressure. If you feel pressure in any of the areas, let's say on the anterior sulcus, then you need to relieve that border so you get a better suction. It means that border is a little overextended. Maybe border molding didn't happen properly during the impression session. So once we have ensured that our denture is seating all the way and the patient is comfortable, we're going to move to the next step. We're going to check if everything is correct, minus retention, if we have any retention issues, and the bite. So basically what we're checking right now is we're checking the occlusal plane based on the upper. We are checking the midline. We are checking overjet, over bites, smile line. We want to make sure the patient bites properly, and then we're going to talk about other steps. So what happens in these steps are very simple. You check if you have any occlusal plane issues, you can use a Fox plane and figure out how off it is, and then you can write down. For example, if the occlusal plane is tilting down towards the patient's right, you can say raise the right side by 2 millimeters or lower the left side by 2 millimeters, depending on what you wanna fix. And basically, all you have to do in these stages where you're checking overjet, overbite, lip support, everything else, is figure out what you want to move, where, and by how much. So for example, you want to reduce overjet by 1 millimeter, or you want to reduce lip support by pushing the teeth back 2 millimeters. So all you have to do is obtain a number and let us know what you want to move and in which direction. It's also helpful if you want to mark a new midline on the trine. You can mark it. As you can see, the doctor over there got a little excited and got the patient slip in there. But mark the trine, and then what we can do is we can take a picture and we can take a little measurement. However, the best help that you can give us is to give us an actual numerical value, because seeing a picture, seeing an image sometimes is difficult, and those markings will not be seen in the scanner. So values are always helpful. So once you check everything, proceed to check the midline. Very important thing about the midline is you want to make sure that the maxillary midline matches the nose. That's what this midline step is. So if you have issues between the upper and the lower midline, that's a bite issue. That's not a midline issue, and it needs to be fixed by taking a new bite. What the midline section is on the paper basically says that if your nose midline is different from your tooth midline, which can happen, for example, if the patient has a fractured nose, and then the internal mid-palatal suture midline does not match the external facial features of the patient, then basically what you do is you have to tell us to move the maxillary midline in X direction, and of course the lower midline will follow. So if you have any questions about what I just said right now, you can type any questions on the chat and then we'll go over them in the end. But keep this in mind when you're checking for midline. And then we're going to move to the third step. So if we have any retention issues, or if we did significant border adjustments, then a wash will be needed. And the way we're going to do it is very simple. If you had any border issues, you need to take a wash with light body only. Meaning if you did, let's say your lingual extensions on the lower were overextended and you ground the border, just take a light body wash. If you have retention issues, it's recommended that you put heavy body on the borders, border mold that, and then do a light body wash over everything. One really important detail about this is that the trine is not going to be retentive by itself. So you will need to have a PVS adhesive available in order to do this. If you're doing an upper, it's also very important that you grind the post-stem area before you do a wash. Otherwise, that post-stem area is going to be copied when we scan it and when you design it, and you don't want the software to create another post-stem on top of the existing post-stem. So it's always recommended to grind that off. If you didn't grind it, there are ways around it. During the software, we can request for it not to create a post-stem, but it's always better to just remove the post-stem when you do the wash. Then the fourth thing we'll be doing is we will take a bite if needed. There are three instances where you would need a new bite. A, if you have a midline mismatch between the upper and the lower teeth. B, if you have a lateral open bite, anterior open bite, or cross bite issues. And the third one would be if you took a wash. So if you took a wash because you had retention issues, it's always recommended that you also take a new bite. Now, whenever evaluating the bite or when we take a bite, we need to make sure the bite is concentric. Now, this sounds pretty obvious, but it happens very often that we get phone calls with doctors saying, well, you know, the patient keeps biting differently, or they keep sending us bites that differed greatly in every iteration, and that is because they're not evaluating the bite concentric. As soon as I tell them, are you checking the bite concentric, they'll take the patient into centric and the patient will bite perfectly. So make sure you're always evaluating the bite concentric. If the patient has been in a position that is not correct for them for a long time because the denture was overgrown or because they never had a denture, it will take them a couple weeks to get used to this new bite. So keep that in mind. In those instances, you may allow the patient to keep the trine for a week or two, allow the bite to stabilize, and then you can take a new bite and send it back to Denka. Now, if you do get an open bite, it's pretty important, especially if this open bite is over 4 millimeters open, that you grind the posterior teeth until only the anteriors touch and then take that bite. We need to do this for two reasons. The first reason being that we want to also be able to evaluate vertical dimension in this appointment. And of course, if your bite is open, it's really hard to figure out if the vertical dimension is correct unless the bite is open by 1 millimeter, in which case you can sort of estimate whether your vertical dimension is correct or not. And the other reason we do this is because it'll allow us to take the patient into a centric position more easily. So this is basically what you're looking for. Please do not use any clear bite registration material. Make sure it's colored. The reason being, if you're going to send it back to us or if you're going to scan it, it's going to be a little difficult to scan with the bite registration material if it's transparent. Now, if you have a intraoral scanner at your office and you don't want to send these back to us, you can scan the wash and extend all the way to the teeth. You can scan this bite and then either send those files to us or upload these files to do adjustments on the Denka design software. And we're going to talk about the Denka design software next week, which is very exciting. And then once we took a bite, the last step is to, of course, to check vertical dimensions. So with vertical dimension, basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be ensuring that the patient is where we want them to be. And if we need to open VD or close VD, we just need to write down how much you want to adjust it by. So please don't say, oh, video is this, VDR is that, because we can't see the external features of the patient. So if you give me those numbers, it's telling me nothing. But if you give Denka a specific number, please open vertical dimension by 2 millimeters or close vertical dimension by 3 millimeters, then that is a number we can work with. Now, here's a pretty short video that we have where the doctor is doing the deliveries. So they have the Denka trines. As I mentioned, in the past, they used to be white. They are going to try them in the patient's mouth, and then they're going to make the adjustments necessary. So first thing, as we mentioned, is to make sure that the denture is sitting all the way. If the denture is sitting all the way, do not evaluate if the denture is not sitting all the way, sorry, then do not evaluate the bite because the bite will be incorrect. So in this case, there was a little bit of an area that was hurting the patient in the posterior left. So they applied PIP paste and they ground the lingual borders a little bit. And to grind them, you just do it with an acrylic burr. You can. I've seen some people even use the big motors for polishing, and they put special burrs in there. You can do that, but you're risking it goes too fast and it's too aggressive, so you're risking over grinding it. So you want to keep it as close as possible, and then they basically do a wash. They check the upper lip length, they check the midline, they make sure the patient is satisfied with everything. And in this case, they're using dental floss to determine whether the midline is aligned the way they want it or not. And that way they can determine that. And then they're going to check the bite. So once you do the necessary washes, and keep in mind that you don't really have to add a lot of material to it. It's usually pretty spot on. So if you add a small layer of material, it should be enough. Make sure you apply enough pressure so it seats all the way, and then you just do your border molding steps. Then they're going to do the same thing with the lower. And then they're going to check the bite. So the last part will be adjusting for the bite. So for the bite, you just basically do what you do with any regular denture. You check it on centric. If you have any occlusal issues, you use your articulating paper, and then you relieve those areas. If there are big areas, then you grind off all the posteriors and take a new bite. If they're small areas and you only need to make small occlusal adjustments, I would just do them in the trine just to make sure the patient's comfortable, but keep in mind you will need to do them again on the final if you do not take a new bite. So that is pretty much what happens in the appointment. And then you either go online and place an adjustment order on the Denka website, or you will basically go ahead and place those adjustments on the Denka design site where you will be able to upload your files. Now, on the third appointment, either you or Denka will manufacture a final denture. If you did an IOD, then the holes will be relieved for you to do a chairside pickup, and you will receive a denture that looks like that. So what's going to happen is you're basically going to be delivering the same with the same steps as what we discussed before. You will use your PIP paste if necessary to relieve any areas, and you check that the denture is sitting properly. You check your bite, make sure the patient is biting properly, they're comfortable. And then once that happens, you're pretty much done. Now, if you're doing an implant over denture, then you have your locators, and then you're going to put the caps on, and you're going to make sure that the IOD sits properly and make sure that you don't need to relieve these holes further. And once you ensure that, then you basically fill these holes with auto-cure acrylic. You're going to seat the denture directly over the patient's mouth, wait for it to polymerize, and then you basically separate it and finish the polishing procedure. So I don't know if there are any questions. I will check the chat right now to see if there's any questions. Let's see. We might have one right here. Will the site deck and a replay of the webinar be available? Yes. So normally what we do is about a couple days, maybe no more than a week, we usually edit this and we upload it to the website. We also share it on YouTube and on Facebook. So if you're friends with us on the Facebook page, you can find all of our videos already there. So you will find the 2 videos that you saw previously plus today's videos. We also uploaded some other videos that you might find interesting from different doctors doing testimonials, to sharing their own insights. You can see videos also for Denka Design, Denka 4, and a couple other things. So if you want to see them, the easiest way is to find them on Facebook on the Denka webpage, and we have some of those videos also available on our personal webpage and on our YouTube channel. Well, that's everything on my end. If you need to reach me, if you want to get a copy of the video, or if you have any other questions, you can reach me at the information that you see in front of you. Next month, we're going to be talking about the Denka design software, how to overcome different issues that are involving the Denka design software, and how to properly design or successfully design without, any headaches or any hassles. And then we're going to be moving a little bit back to ideal record taking methods. We're going to go in depth on the what to do and what not to do with the Denka trace, with the copy denture, etc., to kind of show you best practices. Also, how to better scan if you're scanning the patients. And then the final lecture that we will have in July will just talk about profitability and why it makes sense to switch to digital. So if you're still not convinced after everything you've seen, wait for that lecture, because economically speaking, there's a lot of interesting things involved. So thank you everybody for joining us, and see you next month.